Welcome to the Siwike podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The Siwike podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Siwike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here with one of our new guest hosts, Brian Yang. So he comes to us with a background in engineering and consulting and a whole bunch of other things, and gaming as well. So we'll chat a little bit about that. But Brian, thanks for being on, and how are you doing today?
Absolutely, I'm doing fantastic, energetic. It's a Friday as well, so sun is out, feeling fresh.
Sounds good. So why don't we start off a little bit about telling us what you're doing now, and then we'll get into kind of the backstory. So what are you up to these days, Brian?
Yeah, so what am I these days I am doing a bit of soul searching. I feel like maybe that's probably the best way to do it. So maybe let me put it more concretely. So professionally, I am currently working as a senior consultant in Deloitte. I guess the system engineering group. I really don't know what that means. I've never really known what that means. The whole Deloitte structure is still a bit confusing for me. But what I help do is more digital consulting side. So what we do is we take a product that the client wants to implement. So let's just say a certain client wants to build a digital app. We go in and we sort of do the delivery work. So we, ask the requirements, build the sort of specific features, the UIs, et cetera, and we basically deliver that product for them. So I am one of the consultants that help deliver that work, and that's kind of the professional job of what kind of pays the bill. In terms of like who I am as an individual, I am extremely active in terms of trying to be better, just be better in general, fitness level, working out, training for basketball, calisthenics. These are some of the pieces that I try to do on a daily basis. Other pieces are like gaming. I try maybe taking a little bit of step back, but that's another piece where it actually had a significant impact in my life, which might get into, might get not, depending on what the time permits. But overall, I think still, even now, even in, I would say, my early 30s, I still trying to look for what's next. There's a reason why I reached out to Luki to see what the whole life coaching is about, which is a piece which has always been which for me has always have a huge impact in my life, and something that I want to pass on forward. So a lot of different soul searching, not the greatest concrete answer, but that gives the gist of who I am.
Sounds good. So we'll park kind of where you are right now and go a little bit back in time and ask, what was Brian like as a kid? So what are some of the earliest, fondest memories that you have? So what were you like growing up as a kid?
Yeah, so early as a kid, it's a bit interesting. I'm not going to lie, my memory is pretty hazy at this point.
Okay.
So I would say I grew up in China, and then we immigrated to Canada when I was about 9 years old. As a kid, I was always pretty active. Honestly, I can even let's fast forward to when I feel like I developed something, right? So I think in high school is when I really kind of started to find myself. The idea of being very social. I think the idea of being an extrovert, really looking for people's validation, whether that's a good or a bad thing, for me that was very important. Getting people to like me, getting people to empathize with me, and getting people to quote unquote listening to me, was decently important. I wasn't necessarily the greatest student in high school. I don't think I'll get in trouble for this. Whatever. I'm pretty sure I cheated on every single subject in high school. That includes physics, math, whatever. And then I kind of got into university with barely scraping the bottom. No, I wouldn't say scraping the bottom. I think so. My average was 85, right? So 85%. I was smart enough to work around the system. The stuff that I really like, so chemistry, I actually did really well in chemistry. Math, I did really well in math. Social studies, which is something that I barely passed. That one, I think I just cheated my way through. Biology, I hated that stuff. Oh my God, that was bad. So for me, it was about a place where I wanted to have fun. I wanted to meet friends. I wanted to hang out. I wanted to really have people listening to sort of my ideas and sort of my philosophy. So sort of that extrovertedness is sort of like who I slowly found myself in high school.
Sounds good. So even leading up to that, I guess, what sort of influences did maybe parents or like family members or those around you have? So the typical Asian, like doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer.
Yeah.
85 is pretty good, but as you said, like you weren't doing well. Like that's I think like an Asian fail, that sort of thing.
So-
If you're not in the 90s, that sort of thing. How are those influences as you were going through that high school process?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's really interesting. So I grew up in a Canadian culture under the parental guidance of an Asian parents, right? So like you said, the 85 is not good enough. 85 is basically like a fail, right? Now, the thing is when I grew up in Alberta as well, so you don't necessarily have a lot of sort of Asian sort of diversity there. It's mostly just sort of your traditional Canadian Caucasian people. And what the parenting that they had is, let their kids flow, let the kids be wild, let the kids fail and learn, right? Try new things and really be experimental with it. So when my sort of surrounding is sort of filled with that sort of exploratory learning process, and when my parents really trying to push me for the grades and for everything else, there was a huge conflict, right? So I didn't want to be the nerd of the school. I want to be the cool kid. And like I was decently athletic as well, so it really fit in with sort of like the sports team people. And from that perspective, I think like and from there, they were my friends who I thought they were cool. They were getting the girls, they were getting, the recognition, they were getting sort of all the attention, right? The popularity. That's something that I was striving towards. So that's the idea of like, being the extrovert, being sort of the popularity context sort of really kind of shaped my mind. Again, obviously I still wanted to make I don't want to make my parents mad, necessarily want to make my parents happy, because back then you're a little bit rebellious, right?
Yeah.
So I had my grades at an okay level, and with sort of the Asian foundation, sort of the mathematics skills you learn in China, it carried forward really easily.
Right.
So that's where like in the 85, where kind of like it did. The influence really was from these friends that I had, these jock friends that I had, in junior high, in high school, which really shaped in terms of like how my mind is, of having that external social circle, having that external influence. I think that was more influential than I would say really any of the the Asian doctor, lawyers, engineers, etc., etc.
Sounds good. So, as you're in high school, you now have all these jock friends. I'm guessing you were popular, and or were you? I don't know.
So in high school, it took a turn. So in high school, I did the IB program, which is the International Baccalaureate program, something like that, which is like the nerdy program, right?
Yeah.
I was still athletic, but I think that's when I would say from like junior high to high school, then I transitioned from like trying to be a little bit more serious to maybe the studies, and trying to like with all my friends now being in this program, still having like athletic friends. Now the really close friends are pushing for the Ivy League school, for the Harvards,
right,
and et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. So in this group of friends, and this is where maybe like the influence that I had in junior high to kind of becoming that almost the voice of the people really kind of came in. So I was the dumbass of the class, right? So I think in physics class, I think I was like bottom, the second lowest or the third lowest mark, whatever. And these are the friends who had to influence me, where like I wanted to try hard to want to compete with these people, right? And sort of the extrovertness were sort of the louds, the people's voice, maybe I can say, is where I remember one of our teachers was going to retire, and he was a very beloved teacher that I think was in the school for I don't know how long. Right, everybody loved his teaching style, his uniqueness, the way that he cuts out kids, almost a very traditional Asian way, right? And we wanted to send him a farewell gift. The traditional farewell gift from a high school, you just have like give like a a thank you card, whatever. So I was like, why don't we all pitch in together and buy him a bottle of scotch?
Okay.
Right. So that was really cool, because we, in the end, what we did is we actually not only bought him a bottle of, I think it was like a $500 pair of $500 bottle of scotch. We also bought him a watch that had an engraving behind it that says "Never Stop." Right. And the whole idea and the presentation of that sort of like farewell treatment was just to appreciate his sort of mentorship, his guidance towards the students for decades at the school at this point. So I was the dumbass of the class, but for some reason I felt it was my duty to kind of organize this thing for the teacher's retirement.
Sounds good. So it sounds like that this beloved teacher that everybody respected, you wanted to make sure that, everybody did right by him and make it very, very meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to chat about, you mentioned gaming. Now, did that happen during junior high, high school, university, or where was that time frame?
Man, let's put an elementary, junior high, let's put a high school, university, like during work and even now at this point, right?
Okay.
So I think gaming, especially when you're in high school, you have this kind of group of friends who, especially in high school for me, it was all this group of friends who are very nerdy, right? Mm-hmm. And for us, we bonded together not necessarily by going out and having parties and et cetera, because I don't think we knew how to do that. We like in high school, we literally came home with a bunch of friends, and we would go on this application, very similar to what we like to think of now as Discord or Teams, whatever. Back then, it's called Ventrilo.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard of that, Lukey.
No, I haven't.
You've never heard of it. I'm disappointed in you because I felt like that was your generation. That was the foundation of the gaming experience. That's what Discord has been built on. So I'm disappointed in you. But that's okay. That's okay. So basically the very similar idea is that everybody would go home, and we would, as soon as we get home, we would sit on Ventrilo from 5 o'clock after school to all the way to 12 p.m. right? Okay. And we would do homework together, and we would watch professional gaming together. We would game together, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of the idea where you just kind of quote unquote hang out, be in each other's presence. Really kind of ignited sort of this idea of this almost anonymous community, right? Obviously, these were my friends. Obviously, you know them from real life. But then you eventually you meet these people from online. You're like, who is this person? You're like, this is just my gaming homie. We're just gonna bring him in. Like, all right, cool. Let's we need a plus one anyway. So let's bring him in. So that was a lot of sort of like the quote unquote hangout in high school. It was a lot of the sort of the gaming sessions from Monday to literally Sunday, right? That you just kind of hang out and vent.
Sounds good. So you're in high school, and all throughout you're obviously playing tons of games, and less about the gaming and more about the community that's being built around it and the connections there. But at some point, your parents are going to say, hey, what do you want to do for university, for school, and stuff like that? So how did that decision come about? Because you ultimately went into engineering, but what was the decision to go there?
Yeah, so I was very rebellious. Let me put that blanket statement right. And I had a very big ego. So when people tell me that I can't do something, I'm like, F that. I'm going to prove them wrong. Right? So that was one of the traits from your book, from your book, which was really interesting. I found that very interesting. So that's a huge piece of me. So for me in the entire high school, when I had competing with these who I would consider, world changers, right? Who went to the Ivy Leagues, to me, I wanted to prove them that it wasn't necessarily because I was stupid. It was because I wasn't trying, right? Or the system necessarily wasn't necessarily for me. So because they were so technically strong, I had sort of the option of maybe I should go into business, so business school, and then there was engineering, and then obviously there's the sort of the biochemistry to eventually become a doctor. So I had sort of these three choices. And then for me, sort of the notion of I wanted to bet on myself to prove that everybody that I was smart enough to do engineering, and to really improve sort of my technical skills, right? So because I felt that was a huge weakness of mine. So that was sort of the first major point of like why I wanted to go into engineering, was because I wanted to better my weakness, and I felt that when I was young, I still had that opportunity to. And the second piece, again, going back to the ego, was I wanted to say when I was younger, and honestly to this day, is that I wanted to change the world. I wanted to change the world with some crazy invention, right? And when we were learning physics, the idea of fusion kind of came about. And when we were, Alberta was a very energy-driven province, and the idea was that whoever can come up with an efficient way to make cold fusion possible, they become the world's first trillionaire, right?
Sure.
That's not true because you got Musk and you got Apple, you got all these guys. The tech, I feel like tech's maybe ruling that, but I felt that like to have sustainable energy, to have a innovation that's will power almost mankind to intergalactic travel, whatever. That to me was very important, right? So the idea of like making an impact, making a technological impact on the world, and also improving sort of like my foundation, my weakness was a huge factor of why I chose engineering, right? And kind of stemming from that is why I even quote unquote chose mechanical engineering, because of this idea of working with energy, working with the specific systems, and mechanical engineering being the quote-unquote most diverse engineering. You get to learn a little bit about everything, right? You're a very generic engineer. You get to kind of see the world as a whole and how it works and apply to a very specific field. So that's kind of how I chose engineering. Eventually got into university. University of Alberta is where I went. I don't think I can get in now. The marks are crazy inflated, but thank God I did.
Sounds good. So you go into the university life at U Alberta. What was that experience like? And then what was the kind of transition out into the working world? Did it kind of meet the expectations? Because right now, like your intro wasn't that you were working on the next cold fusion. You're doing something a little bit different. So what was that journey like?
Yeah, so university was actually very interesting. So university for me, it was a way for me to learn how to learn. I read in your book that you were one of the guys who wanted to study, do the books, and go into the little cubicle, rinse and repeat 24/7. I was that guy too. And I realized that no matter how hard I study, I couldn't keep up with these geniuses on the side, right? So these geniuses on the side, who some of them are very close friends of mine, the way that they understood new concepts and their ability to reiterate that was something that was just God level to me. Their way to understand these concepts that are so abstract with no tangible connection to the real world, and then reiterate it to a point where they can connect it to basically a very human level, was amazing. So to me, when I try to just be very self-focused and understood how these concepts work, it just didn't go. My brain just didn't function that way. Now, what really kind of worked for me was basically in the beginning of second year, probably like second semester, second year, was kind of knowing like who I was as an individual and how I learn any concept in general, right? And what was really value to me. So, even recalling back in high school, like being an extrovert, being able to communicate with people, organize the whole, farewell party, the ability to talk things out was extremely important to me. So I remember trying to be a keener, sitting in the front of the class, and like dead front row, right? With like those seats that you have to like with the pad that you
swing out.
Yeah. And then those seats sucked. We had tables, but I'm like, no. I'm gonna sit in the dead front of the row, be one of the seats. And there's one dude who came in and sat right next to me, and to me, that's where I'm like, I need to just make friends to try this method out. So I literally, at the end of the class, I turned to this guy. I'm like, hey, I'm Brian. Do you want to be friends with me? Do you want to study together? And that started a relationship and eventually turned to a study group where some of the smartest guy came in and discussed with us. So we sort of almost reinvented the way that we study things. We didn't do the whole cubicle thing. We didn't do the whole, go into the library and just put your head down, whatever. We became sort of a study group where we would be there from, let's say, 9 a.m. or whenever the first class starts, right? Like 12 p.m. To all the way to 10 p.m. And the goal for us is that everything that we do in terms of homework, in terms of labs, in terms of project, we do it together, and we do it in an open discussion form. And we would tell each other how we think. We would tell each other whether something that we learn was something that we don't learn. Sometimes it's just literally like sitting there, do your own work, right? It's very similar to sort of the gaming days where, yes, we're on this sort of like Discord together, but you're just doing your own shit, right? You're not really talking to us, but when you need to, you're like, hey, Lukey, like I have a question. Like, how did you do this thing? And they're like, oh man, I just did it this way. You're like, oh damn, that's how you do it? It's like, yeah man, so you have to understand it because it's an ABC and not a BCD, right? You're like, oh dude, that's brilliant. So
Right.
so basically because of that, I think my GPA went from I think like a 2.7-ish went to up from like a 3.4 or something like that, right? And then when people realized that the way that we study, it was very fun. I think that's more than anything. It was very fun, right? We had some really brilliant people join in that group. So basically, by the end of fourth year, we had a huge group of like 20 people who were just coming in and out of the group. Like me and the guy who I started this thing with, we were just always there. And then we had people. One of the most proudest achievement that we had was that I think in one of the fluid dynamic class, I think of the midterm with the final, the top 7 marks was all from our study group. I think that to me, this is how people need to study. This is how people need to learn, not by going through the book and just memorizing, but understanding, talking with your colleagues, and kind of just formalizing that bond. And even to now, dude, like that study group that we had are some of the kind of the closest people who I met throughout that entire university.
Sounds good. So what I took from that is to make friends with brilliant people, and if you're one of those brilliant people, then make friends with folks that'll make studying fun.
Yes.
And kind of
Yes.
cross-pollinate all that.
I think
and
so.
I think to your point about reinventing the way folks learn, I think it's definitely needed. So talk to us a little bit about now that you're doing pretty well. You have the 3.4, lots of smart friends around. What was the transition into the working world like?
Ah, man, it was tough. It was tough because I didn't want to work. So to go back to it, this is where maybe I matured a little bit. I didn't really care about too much of the external validation. This is where maybe I started listening to my parents a little bit. So my legal name is Bo, right? So my legal name is actually Bo Yang. And the reason why I put that is Bo in Chinese translate to doctoral, right? So
Okay.
there was almost an expectation since birth for my parents to be, you have to be a professor, right? And at a certain point, at that point in time, it basically aligned with what I actually wanted to do, right? Because the idea of like, I had a few co-op terms I didn't really like in terms of, I was doing like, bullshit data industry jobs and stuff like that, which I didn't really, I'm like, nah, that's not for me, right? And so to me, it was like I wanted to go into the research path to become a little bit more educated, to really tackle the world's sort of like hardest problem, right? So the reason why I even tried to get good grades was I actually wanted to go to like one of the Ivy League school for my master's. So whether that's my actual goal was either Stanford or it was, I think it was Berkeley. Neither of them, did neither of them, but that's a different story. So now so basically the idea of transitioning to the working force was I wanted to become a researcher. I was always very focused on going into masters and sort of pushing the envelope of becoming just more technically sound. And there was an inflection point where that mindset changed. Now, being a professor, obviously, so going to the academic route had multiple sort of like variation to it, right? So obviously the number one was I wanted to push the envelope of technology. I wanted to become a researcher. Fulfill my destiny of becoming a doctor, right? that was definitely on my mind. And I think the last piece, which eventually kind of came on, is having the study group and even having these sort of influence in the even high school. Realize how important to me was getting my voice heard, right? Showing a perspective that is quote unquote different from the norm, and showing people that it is okay to be different and still achieve in a different way. So the idea of mentorship, the idea of teaching was extremely important to me. So because of sort of those three aspects of pushing the envelope, sort of fulfill my destiny, and really teaching was really kind of pushing me to sort of like going to sort of this educational route. So that's actually what I did. Now, when I went to sort of this education route, even having all of this prior co-op experience, doing, CAD design, mechanical design, research, and even sort of like the other jobs that are not really that important, and a huge inflection point in my life was sort of when that first relationship ended, when my, this first long distance relationship ended. Everything kind of came together, and this inflection point is when I realized that all of the world's problems, none of them are technical problems. I feel that every single problem that is caused in this world, and every single problem that I faced in my work, during research, was always bound to a human problem. It was always either a miscommunication, or a lack of empathy, a lack of understanding. Something wasn't right going from one person to another. Technically, everything was always sound. 1 + 1 = 2, right? The drawing is X dimensions. You can never mess that up, but you can definitely mess up how you communicate that dimension should be one when in the reality should be another, right? Units different. All of these are communication to me, and that's what I felt it was the most important. So that's when the switch, when I realized is that why am I trying to push the envelope of technology when if I say I want to quote unquote change the world, technology is not the problem. If you want to change the world, talk about communication, talk about understanding, talk about empathy, talk about the things that you felt was the root cause of every single problem that you saw to this day. And that's the shift of, okay, let's do a startup.
Okay.
Let's do a startup. Let's do a startup, focus on this problem, focus on being to better our communication skills and utilizing your voice, utilizing the idea of anonymity, which that idea also came from the gaming world. So a lot of, subject in my life sort of intertwined back and forth to really kind of push this forward. So the idea of doing a startup also sounded super sexy. Who doesn't want to be Bill Gates? Who doesn't want to be, Zuckerberg, Musk, the big names of the world? And really trying to push this platform of quote unquote hear out. So hear as in listen. This platform was meant to be a storytelling platform to really showcase the stories through a voice media, an anonymous voice media, the contrast of the world. So back then, there was so much positivity. There was almost so much facade in the social media space. I wanted to kind of put the other side. So I wanted to show the pain. I wanted to show, the depression, the sort of the anxiety of like what is there in the real world, right? That unfortunately didn't turn into $1 billion product. Well, actually, that's not true. The product turned into $1 billion product. I wasn't the root cause behind it. There's a product. Oh my God, I forgot what's it called. It's I'll remember when we get there. But the product itself is very similar to something that's out there already. It actually came out to the very similar time. But the difference is I wasn't necessarily the greatest entrepreneur. I wasn't necessarily the greatest product manager or owner, and the funding in Alberta was very lacking compared to San Francisco. But all in all, I would say everything falls on my shoulder, and I think that becomes where the really fault lies. But because of that sort of inflection point and because of this transition to almost entrepreneurship, the idea of being an engineer, trying to solve the world's technical problems sort of went out the drain. So at that point, the inflection point was really to focus on trying to solve the world in terms of being a better communicator, being a better human being, being better at building relationships and things of that nature. And that's where I would say I hit a pretty low point at that point when the whole startup failed.
Well, that's totally understandable if this was this great idea, universe-changing type of thing, and then someone else does it a little bit better than you. that sort of thing will be a challenge. Now talk to us a little bit about the transition into consulting, and then obviously the path you're on right now, where you're trying to figure out, well, what else is there? So what's kind of the steps and transition that way?
Yeah. So. And this is something we can even talk about when we get out of the future episode or whatever. So when we kind of came out, so basically when I hit this low point, how I kind of got over myself was through gaming, really to kind of build this shattered confidence that I had, really to kind of bring out the extrovertedness that I have throughout the gaming community, throughout this sort of the power of anonymity of trying to be yourself in this community. So I was basically depressed for about a good year, and through this entire year, all I did was just procrastinate, game, and just a lot of self-loathing and sort of that darkness that you kind of surround yourself with. At a certain point, what I realized, even just reflecting back in terms of how I achieve things and when I feel the most happy, is I need a place of uncertainty. I need a place of foreignness. I need a place where things are quote unquote against me, and I need to kind of fight my way through that. So the idea, and what I felt even through the entrepreneurship days where I went to different sort of like countries and cities to network, that was exhilarating because you had a blank slate. You were able to be yourself without any sort of like repercussions. So that sort of the power of like a fresh start was so exhilarating. So to me, how I kind of like made that jump was because of the gaming gave me a certain confidence. Of course, we can get into it a little bit later. I basically bought a one-way ticket from Calgary to Toronto. Now, it's not as crazy as it sounds coming from like a lot of the other things. I had a lot of good friends in Toronto. If we go back to sort of my high school days, all of these world changers from IB class, they were graduated from, mechatronics from Waterloo, Inside from University of Toronto, just brilliant people, right? They were managers already in Deloitte. They were, product owners, senior developers, et cetera, because they took sort of that traditional work experience. So they were already in the workforce for about 4 years at this point, right? Mm-hmm. So I had a good network here. And to me, I just wanted to come into a new city and just hustle. My mentality came in was I wanted to learn and I wanted to progress. And I didn't care if I was employed. I didn't care. Oh, no, my bad. I wanted to learn and I wanted to meet people. I didn't care if I was a job. I didn't care if I was living on people's sofa. I didn't care whatever. I just needed to have learning and meeting people as my two solid foundations. So because of that and because of the network that I had a bunch of sort of like referrals, right? And one of my friend was basically saying like, Brian, like, I know you don't like your traditional 9 to 5. I know you think that you're coming down a level, but as a friend, a good level of advice is you need to come down to a normal people level, put your ego aside, right? And experience what this is like, right? Because right now you're nothing. And you have to build some sort of at least professional experience to say that you at least tried this and you say you don't like it, right?
Right.
So he gave me a lot of referrals. Deloitte was one of the people, PwC, just a bunch of things. And what's unique, and I will always be thankful for Deloitte, and specifically the person at Deloitte, the senior manager at Deloitte, was that even when I did the interview very differently. It wasn't your very traditional professional interviews, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't me. What the interview that I did at Deloitte was I told the story of how I got out of depression. And the whole idea was I utilized a video game and I applied the mindset when I put into the video game, which made me from a novice player to a high-ranking player. And I wanted to have that same mindset when I came to Toronto. And what he said was, okay, you're interesting. Let me give you a shot. Okay. So that's how I got into Deloitte. And from that perspective, I think I've been Deloitte for about 3 years. What I can say for Deloitte perspective is that it has treated me absolutely to the highest degree possible. The way that I got promoted, the opportunity that I got, I think it all exceeded a lot of people's expectations. And I would say the biggest thing for Deloitte is that people still continue to allow me to be me, to have this quirkiness, to have this quote-unquote professionalism, but treat me with a certain amount of respect, knowing what my strengths and weaknesses are, and continue kind of pushing that envelope.
Sounds good. Sounds like a nice little transition there. And obviously the journey is still going and you're trying to figure out what is the next adventure in the pathway. But if you were to go back and give kind of young Brian some advice, what are some of the stuff I wish I knew earlier that you'd share with him? Maybe during high school, university, like the major points in your career. What are some of the one or two different pieces of Siwike, and then maybe we'll start ending it off there.
Absolutely, I would say there's one big piece. Big piece, and it's something that I am working on now, and it's the ability to be consistent. And I think consistency, because I think when you're younger, when you look at these athletes, you look at these role models, you look at the fame, you look at the charisma, you look at the confidence level, you look at the money, you look at the fame that they had. So you try to be like them, you try to talk like them. And a lot of those good traits are good. But I think one thing that people, though continuously talk about the hard work, the dedication, et cetera, they don't talk, it's really hard to understand what it means to be consistent. And I think consistency is something that I've always lacked. I've always been very hot and then very cold, very hot and very cold, which really hits you in the mind and makes your mentality a certain way that you don't necessarily want. And I think the idea of being consistent, so for me, how I'm trying to work on consistency is, so I started an Instagram page, and the idea was just to post something about activity there, a couple times a week. Right, which is you basically want to do something constantly. It doesn't have to be on almost even a repeated schedule of like every single day, because that's not might even be feasible. But being consistent and being consistently enjoying the journey with it, right? Don't focus on what is at the end of the road. Just be happy and have fun of what you're doing. And then keep going at it and don't let go of that.
For sure. What I took from that is kind of that expression, the overnight success that took 10 years to build. Basically, those folks where you often don't see that hard work in the background. You just see kind of that tipping point where now everybody knows about them. But typically to get to that point, now there's always kind of folks that for whatever reason that they are successful, like the lottery winners and things like that. But typically, the ones with sustainable success are the ones that day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, they're consistently improving themselves and doing more and more and better. And I think that is a great piece of Siwike that folks can hopefully incorporate in their own careers and journey. But so if folks wanted to connect with you, Brian, or folks wanted to hear a little bit about kind of future aspirations, what can they expect from you upcoming?
That's a great question. So where can they reach me? So LinkedIn is one, Instagram is another one. So LinkedIn handle, I think it's BB Yang at LinkedIn. I don't know. Luki will link this somewhere below. Instagram handle is something that I'm trying new. Hopefully go check it out. Hopefully if it's intrigues you, hit me with a follow, hit me with a like. It is _by-motion. That is BYMOTION. I feel like those two are the good places to reach me. You can email me. You can text me. Love to have a chat.
It sounds good. We'll link all of that stuff in the show notes. And then what are some of the future aspirations that folks can look forward to hearing from you?
That's a good question. I don't know. I want to, again, so right now to me is maybe building my own platform up, getting my voice out there, trying to find out what's next. If I do know what's next, maybe I think the idea is let's come back to this podcast and let's see how I figure that plays out.
Sounds good. We're looking forward to having more conversations, and thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back for another episode.
Awesome. Thank you, Luki.
Thanks, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Siwike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Lukidanu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.